America has over 3 million miles of rivers. For most, they mean quiet weekends. But for a select few, the dark water becomes a dead end. Today, we're covering the 10 most disturbing river disappearances in American history. These cases defy logic, destroy evidence, and fuel nightmares. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out. Now, step back from the edge and let's get into it. Let me set the scene for you because the setting matters here. It matters a lot. Murray, Utah, a quiet suburb just south of Salt Lake City, the kind of place that shows up on those best places to raise a family lists. Chain restaurants, well-maintained parks, minivans in every other driveway. And right in the middle of this perfectly ordinary neighborhood sits a condominium complex. Clean, well-lit, security cameras on the exterior, a little clubhouse for residents. The kind of place where young professionals live because it's safe and convenient and boring in the best possible way. It's late September 2014. Autumn has arrived hard and fast. The temperatures have been plummeting. Mid-40s during the day, dropping into the upper 30s once the sun goes down. And on this particular evening, the sky has opened up. Heavy, unfreezing rain. Not a drizzle, a downpour. The kind of rain that floods the gutters, turns parking lots into shallow lakes, and makes the security lights shimmer and blur across the wet asphalt until you can barely tell where the pavement ends and the puddles begin. This is where Kaylin Lowder lives. Kaylin is 30 years old, college educated. She's built a career in social work and counseling, a woman who has literally dedicated her professional life to helping vulnerable kids. Friends and family describe her the same way. Spirited, funny, deeply compassionate, the kind of person who lights up a room and then quietly checks on the person sitting alone in the corner. And then, there's the dog. Kaylin has a small rescue dog that is essentially her shadow. This animal goes everywhere with her. She once snuck it into a church for her sister's wedding. That's the level of attachment we're talking about. This dog is not a pet. It's her family. Now, here's what you need to know about Kaylin's life at this exact moment. It's not great. She'd recently been let go from her job at a local school, right as the academic year was starting. Losing a job is stressful for anyone, but for a single woman whose entire identity is wrapped up in helping people, that's a gut punch. Financial pressure, emotional pressure, the ground shifting under your feet. But, and this is critical, Kaylin has zero documented history of mental illness, no psychiatric hospitalizations, no prescriptions for antipsychotics, no prior episodes, nothing. Until about 24 hours before she vanishes from the face of the earth. On the evening of September 26th, at 8:50 p.m., Kaylin picks up her phone and dials 911. She's frantic. She tells the dispatcher that there's a massive, violent, armed brawl happening at the condo complex's clubhouse. People fighting, weapons involved, police roll up fast. And when they get to the clubhouse, they find a wedding reception. A quiet, pleasant, totally peaceful wedding reception. No fighting, no weapons, no raised voices. Guests confirm that nothing remotely violent occurred at any point during the evening. Okay? Weird, but maybe she misheard something. Maybe she saw shadows through the window and her imagination ran wild. People make mistakes. Let's move on. Except it doesn't stop. Around 11 p.m. that same night, Kaylin calls 911 again. This time she hangs up almost immediately. When dispatchers call her back, she's confused, paranoid, hard to follow. The conversation doesn't make much sense. And then, the next morning, September 27th, 8:15 a.m., she makes a third call, and this one is different. This one is terrifying. Kaylin is screaming. She's yelling at people she says are inside her apartment. Intruders. She's telling them to get out, to leave her alone. She sounds absolutely convinced that there are violent strangers standing in her living room.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
5584107. I have an intruder at my house.
Repeat the address for verification.
They're stealing from my house.
Okay, say your address one more time. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Murray.
And the phone number you're calling from?
801. Get the out of my house.
And repeat the phone number for verification. Okay, do you know who this person is?
No, I don't. I just know that there's an intruder in my house.
You don't know who they are?
No, I don't. Please hurry.
Are you at the location now?
Yes, I am.
Were weapons involved or mentioned?
They're not talking or responding. I'm just telling them to leave so I can hear them.
But here's the thing. Her roommate is right there. And you can hear the roommate on the dispatch recording, bewildered, calmly explaining. The deadbolt is locked from the inside. The apartment is completely empty. There is nobody there. And Kaylin's response? It's one of the most chilling things in this entire case. She doesn't argue. She doesn't get angry. She just says in this confused, broken voice, "Well, I can't explain that. But I heard, like, two people talking."
Swear to God, someone opened the door. And there's actually, like, people like No, Rachel. Like, people see me get out there all the time. But here's the thing. It's fake. It's fake. Mm-hmm. And then that, why is the door still locked? Well, I can't explain that.
Think about that. She's not lying. She's not making it up for attention. She genuinely cannot reconcile what her senses are telling her with what's physically real. The door is locked. Nobody came in. But she heard them. She's certain of it. Something is profoundly, catastrophically wrong inside Kaylin Lowder's mind, and it happened virtually overnight. Fast forward to that afternoon. September 27th, 3:30 p.m. The condo's exterior security cameras capture Kaylin walking her dog in the rain. And what the footage shows is deeply unsettling. She's having a conversation, a very animated, intense, gesturing conversation. She's responding to questions, making points, getting emotional. The body language is unmistakable. She's engaged in a heated exchange with another person. Except there is no other person. She is completely alone. She is arguing with empty air. And then comes the final image. 5:45 p.m. The cameras catch Kaylin one last time. She bursts out of her building and runs, sprints, directly into the pouring, freezing rain. She's wearing a thin tank top and shorts. She is entirely barefoot, no shoes, no jacket, nothing between her skin and the near-freezing downpour. She leaves behind her cell phone, her keys, her wallet, and her dog, locked inside the apartment, alone. Let that sink in. This is a woman who snuck her dog into a church, who brought that animal everywhere, who treated it like her own child, and she abandons it without a backward glance and runs barefoot into a storm. Kaylin Lowder is never seen alive again. A massive search kicks off almost immediately. La police and volunteers focus on the drainage infrastructure near the condo complex, a small creek that feeds eventually into the Jordan River, a murky, debris-choked waterway that runs through the Salt Lake Valley. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. Nothing. And then, on December 1st, 2014, more than 9 weeks after Kaylin ran into the rain, municipal workers inspecting a drainage pipe discover a badly decomposed body tangled in underwater plants beneath a bridge. It's in the middle of the Jordan River, 5 miles from her condominium. Dental records confirm it. It's Kaylin, 5 miles, barefoot, in shorts and a tank top, in near-freezing rain. And she ended up at the bottom of a river. All right, let's talk about what the police say happened, and then let's talk about physics. The official conclusion is accidental drowning, unlikely the result of a sudden, severe psychotic break. The theory goes like this. Kaylin, potentially triggered by the stress of losing her job and possibly experiencing the sudden onset of a condition like schizophrenia, which can first manifest in the late 20s and early 30s, suffered a catastrophic mental collapse. She fled her apartment in terror from hallucinated threats, ran into the storm, became disoriented by the cold and the hypothermia, fell into the nearby drainage creek, and was carried by the stormwater into the Jordan River, where the current swept her 5 miles downstream. And look, parts of that make sense. The 911 calls are devastating evidence of a mind coming apart in real time. The surveillance footage of her talking to no one is heartbreaking and clearly shows a person detached from reality. Nobody disputes that Kaylin was experiencing something catastrophic that night. The audio alone makes that undeniable. But here's where it falls apart. The creek. The drainage creek next to her condo complex was shallow. Even during a heavy rainstorm, we're talking about a few inches of water running over a concrete channel. This is not a raging river. This is suburban storm drainage, the kind of infrastructure designed to handle runoff with grates, concrete barriers, and narrow culverts, built specifically to prevent large objects from flowing through. The idea that this shallow, channelized creek generated enough volume and force to sweep a 130-pound woman over concrete barriers, through metal grates, and miles into the Jordan River doesn't hold up. The physics simply do not work. So if the creek couldn't carry her there, how did she get 5 miles away? Picture this: a barefoot woman in a tank top and shorts running through a suburban neighborhood in freezing rain. She's not invisible. She's on residential streets. There are intersections, traffic cameras, convenience stores, passing cars. And yet, not a single motorist, pedestrian, neighbor, or surveillance camera between her condo and the river captures a single frame of her. She doesn't show up anywhere. 5 miles of urban landscape, and she's a ghost. How does that happen? Then there is the vulnerability factor. And this is the part that keeps people up at night. A barefoot, barely dressed, clearly delusional woman stumbling through freezing rain in the dark is not just a person in crisis. She is the single most vulnerable target imaginable. If she was wandering the streets in that condition, she wouldn't have been hard to spot, and she wouldn't have been hard to exploit. Proponents of the foul play theory argue that Kylan didn't make it to the river on her own, that she was intercepted by an opportunistic predator within blocks of her condo, killed and dumped in the Jordan River to wash away every trace of forensic evidence. And here's the gut punch. Because her body sat in that river for 9 weeks, the decomposition was so advanced that the medical examiner couldn't determine a definitive cause of death. There's no way to confirm or rule out assault, strangulation, or any soft tissue injury. The water took everything. So we're left with a question that has no clean answer. If the creek couldn't move her, and no camera caught her walking, and the autopsy can't tell us how she died, then what actually happened between 5:45 p.m. on September 27th and December 1st? The police closed this case. Officially, it's a tragic accident, a young woman in the grip of a sudden mental health crisis who wandered into a storm and never found her way back. And maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe the creek was running higher than anyone measured after the fact. Maybe the current was just strong enough that one night. But Kaylin's family can't accept it. Not because they're in denial about her mental state. They've heard the 911 tapes. They've seen the footage. They know something terrible was happening inside her mind. What they can't accept is the geography, the math. The idea that a shallow drainage creek performed the work of a raging river and deposited their daughter 5 miles away without a single witness seeing her make that journey. Because one of two things is true. Either Kaylin Louder, barefoot and barely clothed, traversed 5 miles of urban terrain in freezing rain while in the throes of a psychotic episode, somehow avoiding every camera and every human being along the way, and then fell into the Jordan River and drowned. Or someone found her first, and the river made sure we'd never know which one it was. Kaylin Louder was a woman who spent her life helping the most vulnerable people in her community. She was funny and fierce, and she loved her dog more than anything. And on a cold, soaking night in September 2014, something broke inside her mind. She was caught on camera running barefoot into a storm, chasing a terror that only she could see. And she never came back. I need you to do something before we start this one. Turn off every light in your room. Close the blinds. Now imagine that darkness stretching in every direction for 25 miles. No streetlights, no porch lights, no gas stations glowing on the horizon. Nothing. Just flat, open farmland under a moonless sky, cut through by gravel roads that all look exactly the same, and drainage ditches deep enough to swallow a car. That's rural Minnesota at 2 in the morning. And that's where Brandon Swanson is standing, alone, in the middle of May 2008. The landscape between the towns of Taunton, Porter, and Lind, all of which you've never heard of, and all of which have populations you could fit in a school gymnasium, is a vast, unbroken patchwork of agricultural fields. Corn, soybeans, dirt. The roads are gravel, most of them unmarked. The ditches on either side are steep and soft. And threading unpredictably through this terrain is the Yellow Medicine River, a waterway that was running exceptionally high in May 2008, in some places 10 feet deep, fast and swollen with seasonal runoff. There is no cell coverage worth trusting out here. There are no landmarks visible in the dark. And if you're standing in the middle of this landscape at night, your brain does something terrifying. It lies to you. Psychologists call it spatial disorientation. Your internal map of where you are becomes completely disconnected from physical reality. You think you're facing north when you're facing south. You think that light on the horizon is 2 miles away when it's 20. This is the environment that erases Brandon Swanson. Brandon is 19 years old, 5'6", 120 pounds. He's just finished a 1-year certification program in wind turbine technology at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby. His friends describe him as sharp, logical, a skilled debater, the kind of kid who thinks his way through problems instead of panicking. He's close with his parents, Brian and Annette. He's responsible. He calls when he's going to be late. But there's one critical detail about Brandon that transforms this entire case. He was born blind in his left eye. He wears corrective lenses for his functioning right eye, but his depth perception is essentially non-existent. He sees the world in 2 dimensions. In broad daylight, that's manageable. On a pitch-black gravel road in the middle of nowhere, it's a death sentence. He cannot gauge distance. He cannot judge terrain elevation. But he cannot tell if the ground in front of him drops 6 inches or 6 feet. Remember that. It's the detail that explains almost everything and nothing. On the evening of May 13th, Brandon attends a couple of low-key gatherings in Lynn and Canby to celebrate finishing his college semester. Witnesses say he drank but wasn't wasted. He was functional, coherent, just a kid winding down after finals. Sometime around 12:30 a.m. on May 14th, Brandon is driving home to Marshall on the labyrinth of gravel roads, and he misjudges the edge. His Chevy Lumina slides into a ditch and gets hung up on the incline. Wheels spinning, no traction, going nowhere. He's not hurt. The car isn't totaled. He just can't move it. At 1:54 a.m., he calls his parents. He's calm. He tells them he's just outside the town of Lind and needs a ride. Brian and Annette get in their truck and drive out to Lind. When they arrive, they flash their headlights. Brandon, back at his car, flashes his. Neither of them can see the other. They try again. Flash, flash, nothing. Brandon is looking for his parents. His parents are looking for Brandon. They are both flashing lights into the dark. And they cannot find each other. Because Brandon is not near Lind. He is nowhere near Lind. In the total darkness, navigating by dead reckoning with no depth perception and no landmarks, he has become profoundly, catastrophically lost. But he doesn't know it yet. Frustrated, Brandon makes a decision. He tells his dad he's going to leave the car and walk towards some lights he can see in the distance. He's sure they're the lights of Lind. His dad stays on the phone with him. They talk. For 47 straight minutes, father and son are connected by a phone call as Brandon hikes across open agricultural fields in the dark, climbing over fences, listening to the sound of running water getting closer. And then, at approximately 2:30 a.m. mid-sentence, Brandon yells, "Oh shit!" and the line goes dead. Brian calls back immediately. The phone rings and rings and rings. Brandon never picks up. Brian calls again. Same thing. The phone is working. It's receiving calls. It's ringing in the dark somewhere out in that landscape. But nobody answers. Brandon Swanson is never heard from again. The next morning, police triangulate Brandon's cell phone pings, and the data reveals something staggering. Brandon's car is not near Lind. It's in a ditch near Taunton, approximately 25 miles from where he told his parents he was. The entire search grid has to be redrawn from scratch. The town lights Brandon was walking toward, Investigators later determined it was almost certainly a single red aviation warning light on top of a grain elevator in Taunton. Viewed across miles of pitch-black flat farmland by a teenager with zero depth perception, that solitary red beacon created a fatal optical illusion. He thought he was walking toward a town. He was walking toward a single light, 25 miles in the wrong direction. Bloodhounds are brought to Brandon's abandoned car. They pick up his scent immediately and track it through the fields, exactly the direction he described to his father. The dogs follow the trail directly to the banks of the Yellow Medicine River. And then something happens that nobody can explain. The dogs enter the water. They swim across. They climb out on the opposite bank, and they continue tracking. Brandon's scent goes up the embankment onto a gravel road, and then it vanishes completely. The trail simply evaporates into thin air. The official law enforcement theory is accidental drowning. Brandon, exhausted and disoriented, slipped down the steep bank of the Yellow Medicine River, was overwhelmed by the swift 10-foot currents, and was swept into an unsearchable section of the riverbed. His exclamation and the dropped call mark the moment of entry. Case closed. Except the evidence doesn't support that, not even close. First, the dogs crossed the river. This is the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case, and it's the one that makes the drowning theory fall apart. If Brandon fell into the river and drowned at the moment he yelled, his scent trail would end at the water's edge. Full stop. Dead people don't leave scent trails. But the bloodhounds tracked Brandon's scent into the water, through the water, out the other side, up an embankment, and down a gravel road. That means he went in and came back out. He survived the crossing. If he crossed the river alive, the drowning theory is forensically invalid. Then his phone kept ringing. When Brian called back after the line dropped, the phone didn't go to voicemail. It didn't give a number not available tone. It rang, multiple times. The next day, it was still ringing. A phone submerged in a river shorts out, a phone buried in mudstops receiving signal. Brandon's phone was intact, powered on and above ground somewhere, receiving calls that nobody was answering. That phone was not at the bottom of the Yellow Medicine River. Also, Brandon's father was on the phone with him at the exact moment of the event. Brian heard, "Oh shit," and then nothing. Not a splash, not the tumbling clatter of a phone bouncing down a riverbank, not the muffled gurgle of water. Instantaneous silence. If a person slips down a muddy bank, the phone doesn't teleport out of existence. There's impact noise, there's secondary audio. The immediate total silence suggests something abrupt and catastrophic, not a gradual slide into water, the total absence of evidence. Authorities deployed Department of Natural Resources boats. They installed gates across the river to catch remains or debris. They searched 122 square miles by ground, air, and water. Hundreds of volunteers combed the fields. And in over 17 years, they have recovered absolutely nothing. No body, no bones, no clothing, no phone, not a shred of physical evidence, and unweighted human body surfaces, clothing snags on debris. A phone washes to a bank. The river doesn't just erase someone this completely. So if Brandon survived the river, climbed out the other side, and continued walking, where did he go? The hypothermia theory suggests he made it across but was soaked and freezing. In the terminal stages of hypothermia, victims exhibit something called paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing. They strip their clothes and crawl into impossibly small, hidden spaces. Under a porch, inside a drainage pipe, into a collapsed barn, places that standard search grids would miss. It's possible Brandon burrowed somewhere so obscure that 17 years of searching hasn't found him. The agricultural accident theory takes a darker turn. Brandon was crossing private farmland in the dead of night. A startled property owner encounters an unidentified figure in the dark. A vehicle or piece of heavy equipment strikes him accidentally. The farmer, panicking, uses that same equipment to bury or destroy the remains. It would explain the scent trail ending on a gravel road and the total absence of physical recovery. The sinkhole theory is the strangest of all. Geologists have noted that the Marshall, Minnesota region is prone to sudden ground collapses. A sinkhole opening beneath his feet would explain the instantaneous exclamation, the immediate loss of phone signal as he dropped below ground level, and the perfect concealment of his body and belongings. 3 theories. 0 evidence, 0 remains. 17 years of silence. When Brandon first disappeared, police initially hesitated to launch a full search because he was a legal adult who'd been out drinking. Standard protocol at the time required a waiting period before treating an adult as a missing person. Those lost hours may have been the difference between finding Brandon and losing him forever. His parents fought to change that, and they won. Minnesota passed Brandon's law, which requires law enforcement to immediately accept and act on missing persons reports for adults. No waiting period, no assumptions about voluntary disappearance. Every adult who goes missing in Minnesota today benefits from the agony Brian and Annette Swanson endured. Brandon Swanson was 19 years old. He survived a car crash. He was calm, coherent, and safe on the phone with his father. He walked across open fields for 47 minutes. He crossed a river in the dark. He climbed out on the other side. He was alive. And then he said 2 words, and the earth swallowed him whole. If you've ever been to Nashville on a Friday night, you already know the scene. If you haven't, picture this. Lower Broadway, March 2024, peak spring break season. The entire strip is a wall of noise. Every honky-tonk has its doors thrown open, and live country music is pouring out of every one of them, competing with the music from the bar next door, which is competing with the pedal taverns rolling down the street blasting their own speakers. Neon signs, pink, blue, green, gold, blaze from every rooftop and storefront, turning the whole block into something that looks like Times Square crossed with a rodeo. Thousands of tourists are shoulder to shoulder on the sidewalks, most of them holding tall plastic cups of something frozen and alcoholic. This is supposed to be the safest kind of chaos. Broadway is one of the most heavily surveilled streets in America. Municipal cameras on every intersection, private CCTV on every bar entrance, police officers stationed up and down the strip. It's loud, it's messy, but it's public. You're never more than 20 feet from another human being. But here's the thing about Nashville that tourists don't think about. Broadway runs roughly parallel to the Cumberland River, and the transition between those two environments is shockingly abrupt. Walk 2 blocks north of the Neon, and the bars and the crowds just stop. You cross Gay Street, and suddenly you're standing on a dark, industrial stretch of riverfront, steep embankments, dense, overgrown brush, no guardrails, no lighting. The Cumberland itself is deep, fast, and swollen. Recent heavy rains had pushed it well above normal levels, while creating aggressive currents that could drag anything downstream. The distance between the safest block in Nashville and one of the most dangerous is about 90 seconds on foot. Riley Strain doesn't know any of this. He's not from here. Riley is 22 years old, a senior at the University of Missouri, Mizzou. He's in Nashville for a weekend fraternity formal, staying at the Tempo Hotel downtown with his brothers. He's 6'5", thin, athletic, with light brown hair and blue eyes. On this particular Friday night, he's wearing a distinctive 2-tone brown button-up shirt with dark sleeves, denim jeans, cowboy boots, and a wristwatch. He's tall enough to spot across a crowded bar. He's the kind of guy who stands out in a room. And in a few hours, one of the most surveilled cities in America is going to lose him completely. The evening starts normally. Riley and his fraternity brothers hit the bars on Broadway. They end up at Luke's 32 Bridge, a multi-story honky-tonk owned by Luke Bryan, one of the biggest venues on the Strip. It's packed, loud, exactly what you'd expect on a spring break Friday. At 9:35 p.m., something happens. Security personnel at Luke's escort Riley out of the bar. The specific reason has never been made fully public. The venue cited internal conduct standards. One of Riley's fraternity brothers reportedly follows him partway down the stairs, but then, for reasons nobody has clearly explained, turns around and goes back upstairs. And just like that, Riley Strain is alone in Nashville. His hotel is roughly 5 blocks away. 5 blocks through well-lit, crowded, heavily policed streets. A 10-minute walk, a 3-minute Uber ride. When he has his phone, he has every tool he needs to get home safely. He doesn't go to the hotel. At 9:45 p.m., a security camera at a vape shop on Church Street captures Riley stumbling badly. He's staggering. He collides with a structural pole. His motor control is visibly destroyed. This is not a man who's had a couple of beers. This is catastrophic impairment. 2 minutes later, at 9:47 p.m., municipal cameras record him crossing the intersection at 1st Avenue North toward Gay Street. He's heading directly away from his hotel, away from Broadway, away from the lights and the crowds, toward the river. At approximately 9:50 p.m., a Metro Nashville police officer named Reginald Young, responding to an unrelated burglary call, passes Riley on the street. His body camera captures the interaction. It's brief. Riley doesn't appear distressed. He says, "I'm good. How are you?" and keeps walking.
How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
The officer moves on. At 9:52 p.m., a camera on Gay Street near the James Robertson Bridge captures what is believed to be the final verified image of Riley Strain alive. He's heading toward the river. At roughly 10 p.m., his phone pings for the last time. The signal registers near the Woodland Street Bridge, an area known for steep drops, low railings, and overgrown brush leading directly to the Cumberland's edge. And then silence. No more pings, no more cameras, no more Riley. When Riley doesn't make it back to the hotel, his fraternity brothers raise the alarm. The search goes national almost immediately. Riley's face is everywhere. Social media, news broadcasts, missing person flyers plastered across downtown Nashville. Volunteers comb the riverbanks. Dive teams search the Cumberland. Drones sweep the bridges. On March 17th, 9 days after his disappearance, 2 volunteer searchers find Riley's bank debit card. It's lying on a steep embankment between Gay Street and the Cumberland River, not in the water, on the slope above it, as if it had been dropped during a tumble. And then, on March 22nd, industrial river workers clearing obstructions for barge traffic discover Riley's body submerged in the Cumberland in West Nashville, 8 miles downstream from where he was last seen. He's identified by his two-tone shirt and his wristwatch. But that's not all they find. Or rather, it's what they don't find. The Metropolitan Nashville Police Department and the medical examiner ruled Riley's death an accidental drowning, compounded by severe alcohol intoxication and the presence of THC. His blood alcohol content was 0.228, nearly 3 times the legal driving limit. The official narrative: Riley, profoundly drunk and geographically disoriented, wandered into the dark perimeter of Gay Street, failed to see the steep terrain, tumbled down the embankment, and was swept into the lethal currents of the swollen Cumberland River. And parts of that make sense. A BAC of 0.228 is serious. Combine that with THC, and you have a person whose spatial awareness, decision-making, and motor function are severely compromised. The fact that he walked in the opposite direction of his hotel is consistent with profound disorientation. The body camera footage confirms he was upright and verbal just minutes before disappearing, which aligns with someone operating on autopilot rather than collapsing in a doorway. But here's where the questions start: the missing clothes. When Riley's body was recovered, he was wearing his two-tone shirt and his wristwatch. That's it. His denim jeans were gone, his leather belt was gone, his cowboy boots were gone, his wallet was gone. Now, the scientific explanation for this is a phenomenon called fluvial stripping. The Cumberland was running at near-flood velocities, and when a body gets snagged on submerged debris, the hydraulic pressure acts like a wedge, peeling away non-form-fitting garments. Saturated denim gets extraordinarily heavy. Slip-on boots fill with water and mud. The river can absolutely undress a body over the course of 2 weeks. And that explanation is real. Hydrologists confirm it, but it's also conveniently unfalsifiable. You can't prove the river did it, and you can't prove it didn't. And the fact remains, a 22-year-old man walked into the dark wearing a full outfit and came back missing half of it, and we're taking the river's word for it. Then there is intoxication gap. This is the detail that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. Internal records from Luke's 32 Bridge indicate that Riley was served 1 alcoholic beverage and 2 waters at that specific venue. 1 drink and 2 waters. But within minutes of being escorted out, he's on camera unable to walk straight, smashing into poles and buildings. His eventual BAC was 0.228. Where did the rest of the alcohol come from? Did he pregame heavily before arriving at Luke's? Did he drink at other bars earlier in the evening? Or, and this is the question his family couldn't stop asking, was something added to a drink that he didn't order? The autopsy found alcohol and THC. It did not find GHB, Rohypnol, or other common date rape compounds. But, and toxicologists will tell you this, many of those substances metabolize out of the system within hours, and after 2 weeks of submersion and decomposition, detecting trace compounds becomes exponentially harder. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Another problem is about direction. Riley's hotel was 5 blocks south of Luke's. He walked north, directly away from safety, directly toward the river. If he was simply drunk and confused, you'd expect random wandering, circles, backtracking, sitting down on a curb. But the camera footage shows a consistent linear trajectory away from the crowds and toward the darkest, most isolated stretch of riverfront in downtown Nashville. Drunk people stagger. They don't typically maintain a sustained directional heading for 15 straight minutes. The wallet. His debit card was found on the embankment above the river. His wallet was never recovered, not on the bank, not in the river, not on his body. If the river stripped his pants, the wallet should have been in those pants, somewhere in the water or washed ashore. If it fell out during a tumble down the embankment, it should have been near the debit card. It wasn't. Someone who encountered a visibly incapacitated, separated tourist stumbling through the dark could have taken that wallet and left him to the river. The medical examiner found no defensive wounds, no strangulation marks, no blunt force trauma, nothing that definitively screams assault. But that's the cruelty of the Cumberland. 2 weeks of submersion in fast-moving water erodes soft tissue evidence. The river doesn't just kill you, it cleans up after itself. Officially, this case is closed. Accidental drowning. A young man drank too much, got turned around, and walked into the wrong part of town at the worst possible moment. And honestly, that might be exactly what happened. It's the simplest explanation, and simplest explanations are usually right, but usually isn't always. And Riley's family, and the millions of people who followed this case online in real time, can't shake the gap between 1 drink at a bar and a BAC of 0.228. They can't explain the linear walk toward the river. They can't find the wallet. And they can't stop thinking about how close he was. 5 blocks. His hotel was 5 blocks away. His friends were 5 blocks away. His bed, his phone charger, his safe, warm room, all of it was a 10-minute walk in the other direction. Riley Strain was 22 years old. He was weeks from graduating. He came to Nashville for a weekend with his best friends, walked out of a bar on the most crowded street in the city, and turned the wrong way. 90 seconds later, he was out of camera range. 2 weeks later, he was 8 miles downstream. And the river took everything that might have told us what happened in between. There's something about 1950s America that makes this story hit different. Picture Portland, Oregon, December 1958. Eisenhower's in the White House. The economy is humming. Neighborhoods look like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Tidy lawns, station wagons and driveways, kids riding bikes until the streetlights come on. Christmas is 3 weeks away, and the whole city smells like pine and wood smoke. Kenneth and Barbara Martin live in a comfortable home in Northeast Portland. Kenneth is 54, steady and dependable. Barbara is 48, the anchor of the household. They have 3 young daughters still at home, Barbie, 14, Virginia, 13, and Susan, the baby, at 11. Their eldest son, Donald, is stationed in New York with the Navy, but the rest of the family, they're the dictionary definition of domestic normalcy. Church on Sundays, laundry on weekdays, dinner on the table at 6. On the morning of December 7th, a freezing gray Sunday, the Martins do what thousands of Oregon families do every December. They pile into their cream and red 1954 Ford Country Squire station wagon and drive east into the Columbia River Gorge to gather greenery for Christmas wreaths. Pine boughs, holly, maybe some fir branches. It's a family tradition, It's the most wholesome errand you can possibly imagine. They leave laundry mid-cycle in the washing machine. Meat is thawing on the kitchen counter for dinner. Their bank accounts are untouched. Everything in that house says the same thing. We're coming back in a few hours. They never do. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand what the Columbia River Gorge is. Because it's not a gentle nature drive. The gorge is an 80-mile canyon carved by Ice Age floods, flanked by sheer basalt cliffs dropping hundreds of feet into the Columbia River. In December 1958, the roads were narrow, poorly lit, and almost entirely without guardrails. Freezing drizzle slicked the pavement, fog rolled through in patches. The river below was deep, fast, and lethal. Water in the low 40s, currents strong enough to sweep a car, and so murky you couldn't see 3 feet down. By 4:30 in the afternoon, the sun was already failing. Long shadows stretched across the water. The temperature was locked in the low 40s and dropping. And somewhere on this stretch of frozen highway, a family of 5 in their 2-ton station wagon simply ceased to exist. Here's what we know for certain. Around 4 p.m., Kenneth pulls into a service station in Cascade Locks, a tiny town nestled right on the river about 40 miles east of Portland, and buys 5 gallons of gas. He signs a receipt. Police will later recover that receipt, confirming the family was alive and mobile at that exact location, at that exact time. Shortly after, the family is seen eating at the Paradise Snack Bar in Hood River, roughly 20 miles further east. Witnesses remember Kenneth in a tan zip-up jacket and Barbara in a navy blue coat. The girls are with them, just a family grabbing a quick bite on the way home. Nothing unusual. And then they leave the diner, and the world swallows them whole. A motorist later reports seeing a light-colored station wagon speeding westbound, back toward Portland, near a stretch of road called Trotter's Point. That's the last trace. No more sightings, no distress calls, no witnesses to a crash. The family, the car, and everything inside it simply vanish from the historical record. The next morning, Monday, Kenneth doesn't show up for work. His boss calls the house. No answer. Police are notified, and when they enter the Martin home, they find it frozen in time. The washing machine. The thawing meat. A family home waiting for people who will never walk through the door again. What follows is the largest missing person search in Oregon history. Helicopters scan the gorge. Dive teams probe the river. Hundreds of volunteers comb the cliffs, the forests, the riverbanks. They drag sections of the Columbia with hooks and chains. Nothing. For months, absolutely nothing. Then, in May 1959, 5 months later, the bodies of Virginia and Susan wash up on the shores of the Columbia River. They're found roughly 30 miles apart from each other, downstream from where the family was last seen. The autopsies confirm drowning, no broken bones, no gunshot wounds, no signs of violent assault. They drowned. But Kenneth, Barbara, 14-year-old Barbie, and the massive Ford station wagon? Gone. No wreckage, no remains, no trace. For 67 years. Now, this is where it gets strange, because while investigators were searching for the Martins, they found something else entirely. The day after the family vanished, a stolen Chevrolet was found abandoned in the gorge, not far from the car, hidden in the brush. Police recovered a .38 Colt Commander handgun. It was covered in dried blood. They ran the serial number. And what came back shook the investigation sideways. The gun was traced to a Meyer and Frank department store in Portland. And it was the exact firearm that the Martins' eldest son, Donald, the one in the Navy, had been accused of stealing from that store 2 years earlier while he worked there. Donald Martin's gun, covered in blood, found in the bushes near the spot where his entire family disappeared. It gets worse. The men associated with the stolen Chevrolet were local ex-convicts, and investigators determined that these men had been at the Paradise Snack Bar at the exact same time the Martin family was eating dinner there. Same diner, same time, same stretch of highway. So we have 2 theories that have divided investigators, as armchair detectives and the people of Oregon for nearly 7 decades, and neither one sits comfortably. Theory 1, the tragic accident. This is the straightforward version. Kenneth Martin, navigating the treacherous, icy, guardrail-free roads of the gorge in fading light and freezing drizzle, hit a patch of ice or misjudged a curve. The heavy Ford Country Squire, a tank of a vehicle, skidded off the road and plunged nose first into the Columbia River. The car sank fast. Kenneth, Barbara, and Barbie were trapped inside. The two younger girls, Virginia and Susan, were either ejected during the crash or managed to escape the sinking car, only to succumb to hypothermia in the 40-degree water. Their bodies washed downstream and surfaced months later. And if you stopped right there, you'd have a heartbreaking but plausible explanation. Except for one enormous problem. Where was the car? The Columbia River was searched extensively in 1958 and 1959. Divers went in, dragging operations covered the suspected crash zones, and nobody found a 2-ton station wagon. This isn't a set of keys that slipped between couch cushions. It's a massive vehicle. How does every dredging operation, every dive team, every sonar sweep for 67 years completely miss it? Cars don't turn invisible. Either the car wasn't where they were looking, or something about the geography of the river concealed it in a way nobody anticipated. Hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Theory 2. The Hit. Detective Walter Graven, who worked the original case, never bought the accident theory. And a lot of modern researchers agree with him. Their version goes like this. Donald Martin, or the eldest son in the Navy, wanted his inheritance. He contracted his ex-convict acquaintances, the same men at the Paradise Snack Bar, to follow the family out of the diner. On the dark, isolated stretch of highway heading back toward Portland, the men in the stolen Chevrolet forced the Ford off the road and into the river. They disposed of Donald's bloody gun in the brush and fled. It's a compelling narrative. The bloody gun tied to the son, the ex-cons at the same diner at the same time, the stolen getaway car abandoned nearby. It reads like a crime novel. But here's the thing. If the Martin family was ambushed and murdered by violent criminals, why did the autopsies on Virginia and Susan show absolutely zero signs of physical assault, no bruising, no lacerations, no defensive wounds, no gunshot trauma? They drowned, period. If armed men forced a car off a cliff, you'd expect at least one of the victims to show evidence of a struggle, a grab, a blow, something. There's nothing. And think about the logistics. It's December. It's freezing. You're telling me these ex-cons executed a family of 5, managed to get a 2-ton station wagon into the river without a single witness on a public highway, ditched the gun, ditched the stolen car, and walked away clean? It's an incredibly high-risk, physically demanding operation with almost no margin for error. So the accident theory can't explain the missing car, and the murder theory can't explain the missing trauma. For 67 years, neither side could prove the other wrong. And then, in the summer of 2025, a man named Archer Mayo changed everything. Mayo is an independent diver and researcher who'd been obsessed with the Martin case. He did something nobody in 67 years had thought to do. He studied 1800s construction photographs of the Cascade locks. And in those old photos, he noticed something. A deep, forgotten basin lock, a man-made pit built during the original lock construction that had been submerged and lost to history when the river levels changed. He grabbed his sonar equipment, motored out to the coordinates, and scanned the bottom. 50 feet down, buried nose first in decades of sediment, was the unmistakable outline of a 1950s station wagon. Upside down, Mayo dove on it, using a custom mini-dredge to vacuum away the silt. He recovered human remains believed to be Kenneth and Barbara. He found cameras, nylons, vintage toys, and a single shoe belonging to 14-year-old Barbie. The family had been there the entire time, 50 feet below the surface, entombed in mud in a man-made pit that nobody knew existed. Every dredging operation, every dive team, every sonar sweep had passed right over them because the basin lock wasn't on any modern chart. The car didn't turn invisible. It fell into a hole that history had erased. The 2025 discovery answers the where. It confirms that the Ford went into the water at Cascade Locks, the same town where Kenneth bought gas that afternoon. It confirms that Kenneth, Barbara, and Barbie remained trapped in the vehicle as it sank. but it doesn't answer the how. Did Kenneth lose control on the icy road, or did someone run them off it? The car being upside down and nose first in a submerged pit is consistent with both a loss of control and being forced off the road by a pursuing vehicle. The physical evidence doesn't distinguish between the two, and that bloody gun is still sitting in an evidence locker somewhere. Donald Martin's gun, at the scene, covered in blood that was never conclusively tested against the family's DNA because the technology didn't exist in 1958. So the river gave back the car. It gave back the parents. It gave back Barbie's shoe. But it kept the answer. The Martin family drove out on a freezing Sunday afternoon to gather pine boughs and holly for Christmas wreaths. They bought gas. They ate dinner. They got back in their station wagon and pointed it toward home. And somewhere between that diner and their front door, they dropped into the Columbia River and stayed there for 67 years. 5 people in a 2-ton car swallowed by a forgotten hole in the riverbed, waiting in the dark for someone to finally come looking in the right place. They never made it home for Christmas, and after nearly 7 decades, the gorge is only now beginning to tell us why. I need you to picture this. Saturday night, April 2004. A gravel driveway somewhere outside Lacine, Kansas, 50 miles from any city that registers on a map. No streetlights, no sidewalks, no cell towers worth trusting, just flat farmland in every direction, cut through by gravel roads that all look identical once the sun goes down. The farmhouse sits back from the road, half swallowed by trees. Beyond the porch light, there's nothing. Dense brush, tangled woods, and somewhere past the tree line, the banks of Middle Creek. The terrain is uneven, riddled with ravines and flood-prone ditches. But tonight the farmhouse is alive. Close to 100 young people have shown up for a massive weekend party. Music thumping, alcohol flowing, a completely normal, completely chaotic rural house party. Except for one detail that changes everything. Lacine is a deeply rural, overwhelmingly white community. Population barely cracking 1,000. The kind of place where outsiders get noticed fast. And walking through the front door tonight is a 23-year-old kid from Gardner named Alonzo Brooks. Alonzo, Zoe to everyone who loves him, is of African American and Mexican descent. He's one of roughly 3 people of color at this entire party, nearly 100 people, and you can count the non-white faces on one hand. Zoe doesn't drive, never learned. He's entirely dependent on his friends for transportation, which means that when those friends leave, he's stranded. 50 miles from home, in the dark, in a town where he doesn't know a soul. Remember that. It's the detail that makes everything that follows so much worse. Alonzo drives out to the party with 3 friends. It's supposed to be a good time. He's a laid-back, good-humored guy, the kind of person people describe as mild-mannered, funny, deeply attached to his family. He works as a custodian for a maintenance company in Gardner. He's not looking for trouble. He just wants a Saturday night out. But as the hours pass and the drinking escalates, the atmosphere shifts. According to multiple accounts, racial slurs start getting thrown around. Some of them are directed at Alonzo. The people saying them reportedly include members of a prominent local family, the kind of people who don't get challenged in a town this small. Alonzo, true to his nature, doesn't escalate. He doesn't fight back. He's outnumbered in every way that matters. And then the ride situation collapses. One friend leaves the property to buy cigarettes. He then gets turned around on the pitch-black gravel roads and never makes it back. The other friends filter out at different times, each one assuming somebody else is handling Alonzo's ride home. It's the kind of logistical disaster that happens at every party, except this time, the person left behind is a young black man stranded in the middle of hostile, unfamiliar territory at 2 a.m. By sunrise on April 4th, Alonzo hasn't come home. His mother, Maria Ramirez, finds his bed untouched. She doesn't wait. She doesn't tell herself he's probably sleeping it off at a friend's place. She knows. The dread hits her immediately, and she files a missing persons report that morning. The Lynn County Sheriff's Department and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation deploy to the farmhouse property. They bring trained search teams. Indeed, they bring dogs, professional scent tracking dogs, the kind that can locate a body underwater. They comb through the house, the surrounding fields, the tree line, and the banks of Middle Creek. They search for nearly a month, and they find almost nothing. Alonzo's boots and his hat turn up in a field across the road from the farmhouse, not near the creek, not in the direction his body will eventually be discovered. Across the road, in the opposite direction, the boots are just sitting there like they had been placed. But Alonzo himself? No sign. No scent trail the dogs can follow to a body, no clothing snagged on branches, no disturbance in the brush. The creek yields nothing. The surrounding woods yield nothing. After weeks of professional searching, law enforcement effectively hits a wall, and then the family gets permission to look for themselves. On May 1st, 2004, nearly a month after the party, the Brooks family organizes their own search. 50 volunteers, no badges, no K-9 units, just family members and friends who refuse to stop looking. They find Alonzo in less than 1 hour. His body is tangled in a pile of brush in Middle Creek, less than 650 feet from the farmhouse, not buried in some remote ravine, not swept miles downstream, right there, practically in the backyard. Let that settle for a second. Professional law enforcement, equipped with trained dogs and dedicated resources, searched that creek and the surrounding area for a month and found nothing. 50 family volunteers walked in and found him in 60 minutes. How? The initial ruling from the local coroner was accidental drowning. The theory, Alonzo, intoxicated and disoriented, wandered away from the party in the dark, stumbled into the creek, got tangled in the brush, and drowned. A tragic accident. Let's take that apart. Trained search dogs track scent. That's what they do. If Alonzo's body had been lying in that creek for a month, those dogs would have alerted. Decomposing remains in shallow water produce an overwhelming, unmistakable chemical signature. The dogs went through that area multiple times, and they found nothing. The only explanation that makes sense is the simplest one. His body wasn't there. Not during the search. It was placed there later. Then there is the biology problem. And this is the detail that blows the accidental drowning theory wide open. If Alonzo died on the night of April 3rd and his body sat in that creek for nearly 30 days, he'd exposed to water, air, insects, and wildlife. The decomposition should have been severe. We're talking about a month in early spring in Kansas, but when the federal medical examiner later re-examined the case, they noted something deeply troubling. Certain parts of Alonzo's body showed patterns of preservation that were completely inconsistent with a month of outdoor exposure. The tissue wasn't degraded the way it should have been. What does that suggest? Pathologists have a word for it: cold storage, a freezer, a walk-in cooler, a sealed cold environment, something that would slow decomposition to a crawl and keep the body in a state that didn't match the timeline. Think about what that means. If Alonzo's body was stored somewhere cold for weeks, that's not an accident. That's concealment. That's planning. That's someone, or multiple someones, who killed him, hid the body while police searched the property, and then dumped it in the creek once the official investigation wound down. Another is the boots across the road. Remember where his boots and hat were found? In a field on the opposite side of the road from the creek. If Alonzo drunkenly stumbled off the property and fell into the water, why are his boots a football field away in the wrong direction? Boots don't walk themselves across a road. Someone removed them. Someone moved them. The no drowning problem. The initial post-mortem examination found no broken bones and no signs of blunt force trauma. But here's the real kicker. They found none of the biological markers of drowning in his lungs. When a person drowns, water floods the airways and leaves distinct, detectable signs in the lung tissue. Alonzo's lungs didn't show those signs. He was found in a creek, but the physical evidence says he did not drown in that creek. So he didn't drown. He wasn't beaten to death in a way that broke bones. His body wasn't where it should have been for a month, and an entire town of nearly 100 partygoers claims they saw absolutely nothing. Then the silence. Federal prosecutors would later describe what happened in La Cygne as a code of silence. Close to 100 people were at that party. It's a bottleneck. One property, one gravel road in, one gravel road out. And yet not a single person claims to have seen Alonzo leave. Not one person saw a confrontation. Not one person saw him carried, dragged, or loaded into a vehicle. In a crowd that size, at a party that rowdy, nobody noticed the one black kid disappear? That's not ignorance. That's coordination. For 16 years, the silence held. The local coroner's ruling of accidental drowning sat unchallenged. The case went cold. And Alonzo's family was left to grieve a son, a brother, a grandson, knowing in their bones that the official story was a lie. Then, in June 2020, Netflix aired Alonzo's story as part of its Unsolved Mysteries reboot. The episode reached millions of viewers, and suddenly, Lacine's silence had a national spotlight burning through it. The FBI reopened the case. They exhumed Alonzo's body from his grave in Topeka. They brought in a federal armed forces medical examiner, someone with no ties to the local community, no political pressure, no reason to protect anyone. And in April 2021, that examiner issued a ruling that the local coroner never had the courage to make. Homicide. Alonzo Brooks was murdered. The FBI posted a $100,000 reward for information. As of today, nobody has collected it. Nobody has been arrested. Nobody has been charged. The code of silence in Lacina, Kansas has bent, but it hasn't broken. Alonzo Brooks was 23 years old. He was a good kid with a big family who loved him. He didn't drive, so he trusted his friends to get him home safe. He went to a party on a Saturday night in April, 50 miles from his front door, just looking to have a good time. And he walked into a town that has kept a dark, terrible secret for over 20 years. This story starts in one place and ends in another. And the distance between them is the thing that doesn't make sense. Bloomington Normal, Illinois. Late August 2021, Illinois State University at the start of fall semester, sidewalks packed, parking lots full, security cameras rolling on every entrance. Bright, surveilled, alive. Now replace that image with this one. Peru, Illinois. A faded industrial town 60 miles north, a YMCA with a gravel lot backing up against overgrown woods. Beyond the trees, the banks of the Illinois River, wide, flat, slow-moving, full of glacial mud. In early September, the water temperature was 77 degrees, which sounds pleasant until you understand what that warmth does to biological tissue. A body in that water doesn't last long. These two locations are separated by 60 miles. There is no logical reason for anyone to travel between them. And yet, in the span of 10 days, a 25-year-old graduate student will be seen alive on that campus and found dead in that river. And almost nothing in between makes any sense. His name was Jelani Day. People called him JJ. Jelani was the kind of person guidance counselors point to when they want to show kids what ambition looks like. He graduated from Alabama A&M, joined the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and then moved to Illinois to pursue a master's degree in speech pathology at ISU. That's a rigorous, competitive program. He wasn't coasting through college on someone else's dime. He was grinding. And the reason he chose speech pathology was personal. A childhood friend of his had struggled severely with a speech impediment, and that experience stuck with Jelani. It became his mission. He wanted to help people communicate. He wanted to give people their voices back. But here's the detail that matters most when people try to argue he simply walked away from his life. Jelani's father was actively battling cancer, and Jelani was a registered bone marrow match. He was, in a very literal sense, a lifeline for his dad. His mother has said publicly, and she said it with the kind of certainty only a parent can have, Jelani would never, under any circumstances, voluntarily disappear and abandon his dying father. So when he stops showing up to class on August 25th, his family doesn't wait. They don't assume he's sleeping in or blowing off a lecture. They know immediately that something is catastrophically wrong. Let's walk through August 24th, because this is where the timeline starts to fracture. At 7:20 a.m., campus security cameras at the ISU Bone Student Center capture Jelani walking through the building. He's dressed professionally, blue button-up dress shirt, black pants, a black belt, dress shoes. He looks like a graduate student heading to a meeting or a clinical rotation. Normal, put together, purposeful. Less than 2 hours later, at 9:12 a.m., he walks into a Beyond/Hello Cannabis dispensary in Bloomington. And here's the first crack in the logic. He's wearing completely different clothes. The dress shirt and slacks are gone. Now it's a Jimi Hendrix t-shirt, silver white shorts, and a Detroit Lions baseball cap. This is the last time Jelani Day is seen alive. Now, people change clothes. That's not inherently suspicious. But the speed and completeness of the change raises questions. He didn't just swap a jacket. Dude, he went from a full professional outfit to casual streetwear in under 2 hours. Did he go home between those 2 camera sightings? Was he meeting someone who required a different appearance? Was he told to change? We don't know. And nobody has ever been able to explain why. The next day, August 25th, Jelani doesn't show up for his mandatory clinical work. He misses a scheduled meeting with his academic advisor. His phone goes dark. His family reports him missing immediately. On August 26th, 2 days after that last camera sighting, police locate Jelani's vehicle. It's a white 2010 Chrysler 300, not exactly a subtle car. And it's not parked at his apartment. It's not in a campus lot. It's not at a friend's house. It's tucked into a wooded area behind a YMCA in Peru, Illinois, 60 miles from his life. In a town where he has no known friends, no family, no professional connections, no reason to be. And the car has been staged. The license plates have been physically removed, unscrewed and discarded. This isn't a plate that fell off on the highway. Someone took the time to remove them deliberately, specifically to delay the identification of the vehicle. Inside the car, investigators find the casual clothes Jelani was last seen wearing at the dispensary, the Hendrix shirt and the white shorts, folded or set aside. Nearby in the surrounding woods, his wallet, his university lanyard, and his ISU student ID are found scattered in different locations, not together in a pile, spread out, dispersed. And Jelani's cell phone? It's not in the car, it's not in the woods, it won't be found for weeks, and when it finally turns up, it's in a place that makes no sense at all, shattered on the shoulder of an interstate highway back in Bloomington. 60 miles from the car, a random man finds it while retrieving a mattress that fell off his truck. Let's just sit with that geography for a second. Jelani's phone is found 60 miles south of his car. His clothes are in the car. His ID is scattered in the woods around the car. And when his body is eventually pulled from the Illinois River, about a mile from where the car was parked, he's wearing a third set of clothes, a tank top and underwear with a black sweatshirt tied around his waist. 3 outfits. Campus security footage shows outfit 1. The dispensary shows outfit 2. The river gives back outfit 3. Nobody has ever explained where outfit 3 came from or when he changed into it. The LaSalle County coroner ruled the cause of death as drowning. But the coroner was careful with his language. He called it a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning they didn't find evidence of stabbing or blunt force skeletal trauma. And because he was found in water, drowning became the default. Not because they proved he drowned, because they couldn't prove anything else. And local law enforcement's implicit theory, the one they never quite said out loud but clearly operated under, was a mental health crisis. Jelani snapped, drove erratically to a random town, stripped his clothes, walked into the river, and drowned. Case closed. Let's take that apart piece by piece, the license plates. This is the detail that should end the mental breakdown theory on its own. If a person is in the grip of a sudden psychotic episode, if they are so far gone that they're stripping their clothes and walking into a river to die, they are not thinking clearly enough to grab a screwdriver, methodically unscrew both license plates from their vehicle, and discard them in a separate location to avoid identification. That is not the behavior of a person in crisis. That is the behavior of someone covering tracks. Either Jelani was thinking with the cold, meticulous logic of a person staging a scene, or, far more likely, someone else removed those plates. The shattered phone. Jelani's phone was found destroyed on an interstate shoulder in Bloomington, 60 miles from where his car was hidden. If he drove himself to Peru, his phone should be somewhere along the route or in the car or on his body. Instead, it's back where he started, smashed on the side of a highway. That trajectory suggests his phone was disposed of early, possibly thrown from a moving vehicle heading north toward Peru. If someone intercepted Jelani near Bloomington, the first thing they'd do is destroy and dump the device that could track his location. The scattered evidence. His wallet, lanyard, and student ID weren't left neatly in the car. They were found scattered through the surrounding woods. That's not how a suicidal person behaves. You don't take a nature hike through the brush, tossing your identification like breadcrumbs. But it is consistent with someone deliberately spreading items across a wide area to confuse scent dogs and delay the forensic timeline. The third outfit. This is the one nobody can explain. Jelani was last seen alive in the Hendrix shirt and white shorts. Those clothes were found in his car. But his body was recovered from the river wearing a tank top, underwear, and a sweatshirt tied around his waist. Where did those clothes come from? When did he change? A man experiencing a sudden mental break doesn't typically pack a third outfit, drive an hour, change again, and then enter a river. But a person being held against their will might end up in someone else's clothing. And then there's the detail that nearly derailed the entire investigation. When Jelani's body was recovered after roughly 11 days in 77-degree water, the decomposition was extreme. An independent pathologist noted that certain organs, the brain, liver, spleen, were missing, sparking viral organ harvesting theories. The coroner later clarified the organs had liquefied from the warm water and bacteria. Scientifically sound, but the misinformation spread faster than the correction, distracting from the real unanswered questions. What makes this case so infuriating isn't just the evidence, it's the response. Jelani's mother, Carmen Boldenday, has spoken publicly about having to fight just to get law enforcement to treat her son's disappearance with urgency in those first critical hours. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump took up the family's cause. National activists pointed to the contrast between the media frenzy surrounding cases involving missing white women and the relative silence that greeted a missing black graduate student. The family pressed for answers. They pointed to unconfirmed eyewitness reports of two men seen near Jelani's car at the YMCA lot. They questioned why a driven, ambitious young man with a dying father would voluntarily drive to a town with a documented history as a sundown community. They demanded to know who removed those license plates, who shattered that phone, and who dressed their son in clothes that weren't his. The official cause of death remains drowning. The official manner remains undetermined. And as of today, not a single person has been arrested, charged, or named as a suspect. Jelani Day was 25 years old. He was a bone marrow match for his father. He was weeks into a graduate program that was going to let him spend his life giving people their voices. He walked across his college campus on a bright August morning, dressed for the future. And 10 days later, he was pulled from a muddy river 60 miles away, wearing clothes that nobody can account for, his car hidden in the woods with the plates stripped off, his phone shattered on a highway, and his identity scattered through the trees. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure Jelani Day wasn't found. And whoever that someone is, they're still out there. I want you to imagine the coldest Halloween party you've ever been to. Now make it worse. It's October 31st, 2002, downtown Minneapolis. The temperature has dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 below 0 Celsius, and the wind chill is making it feel even colder than that. But it's Halloween night in a major college town, which means nobody cares about the weather. The streets around the bar district are absolutely packed. Thousands of University of Minnesota students flooding the sidewalks in every costume imaginable. Fake blood, face paint, capes, wigs, platform shoes. A river of bodies moving between bars, spilling out of doorways, shouting over each other in clouds of frozen breath. The Lone Tree Bar and Grill is right in the middle of it. It's loud, hot, and crammed to the walls. Off-duty police officers are working the door as private security. Outside, the neon signs blur against the cold glass. Inside, it's a pressure cooker of noise and energy. But step 2 blocks in any direction from that strip of light and music, and you enter a completely different world. Because downtown Minneapolis sits right on the Mississippi River. And on a night like this, the river corridor is a black void, deep, treacherous currents running between the 3rd Avenue Bridge and St. Anthony Falls. Industrial debris under the surface, zero visibility on the water. The temperature differential between the warm, packed bars and the lethal riverbanks is so extreme, it's almost surreal. You can walk from total safety to mortal danger in about 90 seconds. This is the night Chris Jenkins goes out to celebrate. Chris is 21 years old, a senior at the University of Minnesota's prestigious Carlson School of Management. He's the co-captain of the lacrosse team, playing goalie, the position that requires the most nerve. He's 6 feet tall, muscular, athletic, and by every account a responsible, sharp, well-liked kid. This is his first Halloween since turning 21. He's earned this night. He arrives at the Lone Tree with his girlfriend and another couple. He checks his winter coat, his wallet, and his keys inside the bar. Because here's the detail that changes the entire survivability equation of what happens next. Chris is wearing a Halloween costume, a Native American outfit, a thin loincloth, a feather headband, and oversized slip-on moccasin-style shoes. It's a costume designed for a warm, packed bar. And it is not designed for 20-degree weather. There is virtually zero thermal protection on his body. Remember that. Because in a few hours, this costume becomes the most important piece of forensic evidence in the case. Around midnight, something goes wrong inside the Lone Tree. The specifics have never been fully verified, but the result is clear. Off-duty police officers working as bouncers escort Chris Jenkins out of the bar. Some kind of minor dispute, maybe a bumped shoulder, maybe a raised voice. The kind of thing that happens in a packed bar 1,000 times a night. But here's the thing. When bouncers throw you out, they don't hand you your coat and wish you well. Chris is out. His coat is in. His wallet is in. His keys are in. His girlfriend and friends are still upstairs, unaware he's been ejected. So now you have a 21-year-old man standing on a Minneapolis sidewalk in 20-degree weather, wearing what amounts to a thin shirt and a loincloth, oversized, unlaced moccasins on his feet, no phone, no money, no way to get into his apartment. He is, in that instant, profoundly vulnerable. And then, he's gone. Independent witnesses later tell investigators they saw a violent altercation right across the street from the Lone Tree, in front of a pizza shop called Times Square Pizza and Subs. Roughly 10 people beating an unidentified individual. Nobody calls the police. Nobody intervenes. It's Halloween in a college bar district. Chaos is the baseline. Fights blend into the noise. Chris Jenkins is never seen alive again. When Chris doesn't come home, his family and friends immediately know something is wrong. This isn't the kind of kid who disappears for 3 days without calling. A massive search begins. Private investigators hired by the family deploy 2 separate bloodhound tracking teams. These are highly trained scent dogs, the gold standard in missing person searches. Both dogs, working independently, track Chris's scent from the front of the pizza shop into an adjacent underground parking garage. The trail leads through the garage and terminates at 2 specific parking stalls, numbers 89 and 90. The scent doesn't continue out of the garage. It doesn't lead to the river. It doesn't lead to a sidewalk or an alley. It stops at 2 parking spots. When investigators examine those stalls, they find something. Droplets of blood residue on the concrete, a piece of red string. Red feather fragments that are identical to the feathers on Chris's Halloween costume. And here's the detail that should make your blood run cold. A bouncer who worked at the Lone Tree Bar reportedly occupied one of those 2 specific parking stalls on the night Chris disappeared. When scent dogs were brought to this bouncer's vehicle, they produced a mild positive alert. Think about what that trail is telling you. Chris's scent goes from the pizza shop, where witnesses saw a group assault, into an underground garage and stops at a parking space associated with a bar employee. It does not lead to the river. Weeks turn into months. The search continues through the brutal Minnesota winter. And then, on February 27, 2003, 4 months after Halloween, 2 pedestrians walking near the 3rd Avenue Bridge spot something in the Mississippi River. Why, Chris Jenkins's body, trapped in a log jam, still wearing his Halloween costume. And the condition of that body is what turns this case from a tragedy into something far more disturbing. The Minneapolis Police Department initially classified Chris's death as an accidental drowning. Their theory was simple. A moderately intoxicated young man, dressed inadequately for the freezing weather, wandered away from the bar, became disoriented, stumbled to the river, and fell in. Let's tear that apart. The position of the body. When a person falls into freezing water and drowns, the body goes through what forensic pathologists call the instinctive drowning response. It's involuntary. You thrash, your arms splay outward, you fight for air, you die face down with your limbs extended in a posture of desperate struggle. And Chris Jenkins was found on his back with his arms rigidly crossed over his chest, like a man laid out in a casket. That is not how drowning victims look. That is how a body looks when rigor mortis sets in while it's lying on a flat surface. It means he was dead before he ever entered the water. The costume. Chris spent 4 months in the Mississippi River. 4 months of turbulent currents, ice formation, log jams, and the biological bloating that comes with aquatic decomposition. And yet when they pulled him out, his costume shirt was still neatly tucked into his pants. His oversized slip-on moccasins were still on his feet. Think about that. Loose, unlaced footwear gets stripped off a body within hours in moving water. The river rips shoes off living swimmers. But after 4 months, his slip-ons stayed on. The only way that makes sense is if his body wasn't subjected to prolonged river currents, if it was placed in the water much later than Halloween night. The hair. When they recovered Chris's body, his left hand was clenched into a tight fist. Inside that fist was a clump of human hair. DNA testing confirmed it was his own. He had ripped his own hair out. That kind of self-inflicted avulsion doesn't happen during a peaceful slide into unconsciousness. It happens during extreme physical agony. It happens when someone is being tortured or restrained, and the pain is so unbearable that the body's reflexes turn inward. The toxicology. Chris's blood alcohol content was 0.12%. That's above the legal driving limit, but it's not blackout drunk. It's not falling down drunk. Yet it's not, I can't tell the difference between a sidewalk and a river drunk. A 6-foot athletic lacrosse goalie at 0.12 is buzzed. He's not incapacitated. But his system also contained traces of GHB, gamma-hydroxybutyrate, a date rape drug, a drug that induces rapid unconsciousness and is commonly used in drug-facilitated assaults. And then there's the timeline. Independent forensic pathologists who reviewed the case concluded that the condition of Chris's remains indicated he had been held somewhere for 3 to 5 days after his disappearance before his body was introduced to the water. Not 4 months, days, which means someone kept him. And then someone put him in the river. The parking garage, the blood, the feathers, the bouncer's stall. The scent trail that led to a car and not to the water. The GHB, the posed body, the tucked shirt and intact shoes, the fist full of his own hair. None of that is an accident. Chris's parents, Steve and Jan Jenkins, spent years fighting the Minneapolis Police Department. They hired their own forensic experts. They demanded reviews. They wouldn't stop. And in November 2006, they won. Minneapolis Police Chief Tim Dolan held a press conference and formally apologized to the Jenkins family. Based on new evidence, including statements from an incarcerated witness who claimed Chris was intentionally thrown from a bridge, the department officially reclassified his death from accidental drowning to criminal homicide. It was a stunning reversal, and it validated everything Chris's parents had been screaming into the void for 4 years. The case became the cornerstone of the controversial smiley face killers hypothesis, a theory championed by retired NYPD detectives, positing an interstate network of serial killers who target athletic, college-aged men, drug them, hold them captive, and dump their bodies in urban waterways. The FBI has formally rejected the overarching theory, citing a lack of consistent forensic links between the nationwide cases. And they may be right about the nationwide pattern. But the local evidence in Chris Jenkins's case doesn't need a nationwide conspiracy to be terrifying. The bloodhounds, the parking garage, the GHB, the posed body, the 3 to 5 day captivity window, all of that points to something that happened right there in Minneapolis, perpetrated by people who were at that bar, on that street, on that night. As of today, nobody has been arrested for the murder of Chris Jenkins. The homicide classification stands, the case remains open, and the questions remain unanswered. How do you abduct a 6-foot athletic young man off a packed downtown street on the busiest night of the year without a single person seeing it happen? How do you hold someone captive for days, murder them, and deposit their body in a major urban river without leaving a trace? And how does a police department spend 4 years calling it an accident when the forensic evidence was sitting right in front of them? Chris Jenkins was 21 years old. He was weeks away from finishing his degree. He walked into a bar on Halloween night to celebrate with his friends, got separated from them by a bouncer's decision, and stepped into the freezing dark wearing a costume that gave him no chance against the cold. 4 months later, the river gave him back. Arms folded, shirt tucked, shoes still on, hair clenched in his fist, posed like someone had laid him down to sleep and then let the ice freeze over him. Someone did that, and someone is still out there. This is a story about how long a river can keep a secret. Sartell, Minnesota. September 1967. It's a small, quiet, working-class town sitting right on the banks of the Mississippi River, a few miles north of St. Cloud. The kind of place where everybody knows what car you drive, what time you get to work, and what you ordered for breakfast. Life moves slowly here, predictably. The river flows past town the same way it has for centuries, wide, deep, silty, and dark. And nobody pays it much attention because it's always been there. It's just the background. Roy George Ben is 59 years old, and he is not a man who blends into the background. He's affluent by Sartell standards, a widower whose kids are grown, running his own apartment complex in the St. Cloud gas and appliance service. He's well known around town, well-liked, stable. His family describes him as content, satisfied with his life, completely without the kind of psychological distress that makes a man disappear voluntarily. But here's the detail that defines this entire case. Roy Ben carried cash. Lots of it, thousands of dollars, on his person, all the time. It wasn't paranoia or eccentricity, it was just how he operated. He ran his businesses debt-free and preferred physical money. Everyone who knew him knew this. The regulars at the King's Inn Supper Club knew it. The staff at Claude's Shell Station next door knew it. In a town this small, that kind of detail doesn't stay quiet. And Roy didn't just carry the money quietly. He looked the part. On the morning of September 25th, 1967, he's wearing a tailored dark suit, a crisp white French-cuffed shirt with gold and pearl cufflinks. He's driving his pride and joy, a metallic blue 1963 Buick Electra, Minnesota plates 6DU516. This is not a small car. The Electra is a 2-ton, 18-foot-long slab of Detroit steel with chrome bumpers you can see from a block away. It's the kind of vehicle that announces itself. At 4 a.m. on that September morning, Roy finishes breakfast at the King's Inn. He walks outside into the pre-dawn darkness, climbs into the Buick, starts the engine, and pulls out of the lot. And that's it. He's gone. The man, the money, the suit, and the giant blue Buick, all of it vanishes into the dark. Roy doesn't show up at his apartment complex. He doesn't show up at his business. He doesn't call anyone. Nobody sees the Buick parked at a motel, abandoned on a highway, or sitting in a ditch. It's as if the car drove off the surface of the earth. Law enforcement mounts a massive multi-county search. And because everybody knows about the cash, the investigation immediately gravitates toward the darkest explanation: robbery and murder. A wealthy man carrying thousands, driving a flashy car at 4 in the morning? That's a target. Detectives theorize that someone inside the supper club watched Roy leave, followed him into the darkness, ambushed him, took the money, and disposed of the body in the vehicle. But disposed of them where? Dive teams are sent into the deep rock quarries surrounding St. Cloud, isolated, flooded pits that make ideal dumping grounds. They find nothing. Investigators monitor national banking networks for any transaction tied to Roy's accounts. Zero activity. They watch vehicle registration databases for the Buick's VIN number. It never resurfaces. No one retitles it. No one scraps it. No one sells it for parts. An 18-foot, 2-ton metallic blue automobile simply ceases to exist. In 1975, after 8 years of dead ends, Roy Benn is legally declared dead. The case goes cold. Generations turn over. The people who remembered Roy die. The detectives who worked the case retire. The King's Inn closes. Sartell grows and changes, and the story of the man who vanished with a pocket full of cash becomes a local footnote, something your grandfather might mention if you brought it up, but nobody really talks about anymore. The Mississippi River keeps flowing past town, the same as it always has, wide, dark, patient. August 9th, 2025, nearly 58 years later. Two friends, Brody Locke and James Ham, are out on the Mississippi near County Road 1 in Sartell, was doing what thousands of Minnesotans do every summer weekend, fishing for walleye. It's a completely normal afternoon. Locke has recently purchased a new piece of equipment, a Garmin LiveScope, which is a forward-facing sonar unit that generates real-time, three-dimensional images of everything in the water column ahead of the boat. Traditional sonar is basically a downward-pointing flashlight. You have to drive directly over something to see it. LiveScope is more like a floodlight. It sweeps horizontally, rendering a live video feed of structures, fish, and debris in front of you as you move. It's the kind of technology that simply didn't exist in any consumer form when Roy Benn disappeared, or during the decades of fruitless searches that followed. Ham hooks a walleye, the fish fights. Locke pans his sonar transducer toward the struggling fish to watch the action on screen. And when the beam sweeps across the bottom, it illuminates something that is very clearly not a rock, not a log, and not a fish. 20 feet below the surface, sitting on the riverbed, is the unmistakable chassis of a large 1960s-era sedan. Locke later told reporters the discovery was 100% luck. If his buddy hadn't hooked that walleye at that exact GPS coordinate, prompting him to manually rotate the transducer, the sonar beam would never have swept across the car. They would have motored right past it, the same way every other boat on the Mississippi had for 58 years. They call the authorities. The Stearns Benton dive team enters the water and physically confirms the target. Collins Brothers. Towing hooks up to the wreck and drags it to the surface. What comes out of the Mississippi River is a severely deteriorated, sediment-packed shell of a car. But even through the corrosion, the shape is unmistakable. It's a Buick Electra. And inside the cabin, beneath decades of silt, are human skeletal remains. On September 4th, 2025, forensic pathologists at the Midwest Medical Examiner's Office extract DNA from the remains and match it to a familial sample provided by Roy's great-nephew back in 2018. Positive identification. It's Roy Benn. After 58 years, the where is finally answered, and then, in November 2025, the medical examiner releases the final autopsy findings, the cause of death: accidental motor vehicle crash with water submersion, no evidence of foul play, no bullet holes in the bone, no fractures consistent with assault, no defensive wounds, nothing. Roy Benn was not murdered, he was not robbed, he was not ambushed by criminals who followed him out of the King's Inn, he simply drove into the river and sank. Case closed, right? Well, mostly. Because even with the mystery technically solved, a few things still gnaw at you. First is the invisible 2-ton car. The Buick was 20 feet below the surface, not 50, not 100, 20 feet, in a stretch of river that has been fished, boated, and navigated by thousands of people every single year for nearly 6 decades. The Mississippi at Sartell isn't some vast unexplored ocean trench. It's a known, trafficked waterway. How does a massive sedan sit that shallow for that long without a single anchor snagging it, a single low-water season exposing it, after a single piece of chrome reflecting a flashlight beam during any of the searches conducted in the 60s and 70s? The answer is silt. The Mississippi is a relentless engine of sediment. The moment the Buick hit bottom, the current began burying it. Year after year, layer after layer, sand and mud encased the chassis until it was indistinguishable from the riverbed itself. The crude dragging operations and visual searches used in the 1960s and 70s were looking for a car-shaped object. What they were actually passing over was a car-shaped mound of silt. Only a forward-facing sonar unit, technology that didn't reach consumer fishing boats until the 2000s, could penetrate the sediment and render the structure beneath. Then there is investigative anchoring. For 58 years, every detective, every family member, every armchair theorist operated under the same assumption: Roy was murdered for his money. And it made perfect sense. A wealthy man who advertises his cash, last seen at 4 a.m., vanishes along with his car. The statistical probability screams targeted robbery. That assumption hijacked the entire investigation. It sent dive teams to remote quarries, isolated dumping grounds where a killer would hide a murder vehicle. Instead of searching the river right next to the road Roy drove every single day. The investigators were so locked onto the crime narrative that they never considered the simplest, most boring possibility: that an older man driving a heavy car in the pre-dawn darkness of 1967 simply drifted off the gravel shoulder and went into the water. Another is the cache. Here's what still lingers. The medical examiner found no foul play, but the anaerobic environment inside the buried cabin preserved certain items remarkably well. Roy's wallet was recovered, still containing identifiable cards. So, the wallet survived. But the cash? Paper currency submerged in river water for 58 years would have disintegrated completely. There's no way to confirm or deny whether the thousands of dollars Roy was carrying that morning were still in his pocket when the car went in, or whether someone took that money before the car ever hit the water. The river destroyed the one piece of evidence that would have settled the question definitively. The bones say accident. The silt says concealment by nature. But the cache? The cache says we'll never really know. Roy Ben's case is, in a strange way, the most optimistic story in this series. Not because of how he died. That's as lonely and sudden as death gets. But because it was solved. After 58 years of silence, two guys fishing for walleye on a summer afternoon did what generations of detectives, dive teams, and search parties couldn't. Not because they were smarter, because they had a piece of technology that turned the invisible visible. And it was pure, dumb luck. A fish on a line. A sonar beam swept in the right direction at the right second. A few degrees of rotation on a transducer. That's the margin between a cold case that lasts forever and a family that finally gets to bury their uncle. Roy Ben was 59 years old. He wore gold cufflinks and drove an 18-foot Buick and carried enough cash to make people talk. He sat down for breakfast at 4 a.m, walked out into the dark, and drove straight into the Mississippi River. And the river took him in, covered him with silt, and held him for 58 years without telling a soul. He was 20 feet below the boats that passed over him every summer, 20 feet below the fishermen who cast their lines above his roof, 20 feet below a town that had long since stopped looking. All it took to find him was a walleye and a piece of sonar that hadn't been invented yet. This is the one that's different from the others. In every other case in this series, we're wrestling with the unknown. Who did it? What happened? Whether anyone did anything at all. But in this one, we know exactly who took her. A man confessed he went to prison. And yet, over 26 years later, the most important question hasn't been answered. Where is she? Kettering, Ohio, a suburb of Dayton, February 7th, 1999. It's a Sunday afternoon, and the weather is doing that miserable Midwestern winter thing where it can't commit. Low 40s, overcast, a light drizzle threatening to turn into freezing fog. The kind of day where you wear a jacket but you don't zip it. The kind of day where you let your kid walk the dog around the block because it's not that cold and the neighborhood is safe, and what's the worst that could happen? Indian Riffle Park sits at the edge of the residential grid, right next to the Kettering Recreation Complex. It's a standard suburban green space, a pond, some walking trails, a wooded perimeter. In the summer, it's full of families and joggers. On a drizzly February afternoon, it's empty. The freezing mist has driven everyone indoors. The walking paths are deserted. The parking lot is bare. This is the stage. A safe neighborhood, an empty park, a 9-year-old girl in a bright pink rain jacket. Erica Nicole Baker is 3 feet 11 inches tall and weighs 65 pounds. She has blonde hair, hazel eyes, and slightly crooked front teeth. She's 9 years old and she loves animals, especially her family's small Shih Tzu, which she walks as often as they'll let her. But today hasn't been a great day for Erica. She's upset. Her father, Greg Baker, forgot to get tickets for a father-daughter dance she'd been looking forward to. It's the kind of disappointment that seems enormous when you're 9, the kind that makes you want to be alone for a little while, to walk it off, to let the dog pull you down the sidewalk while you stew. She asks her grandmother, Pam Schmidt, if she can take the Shih Tzu for a walk. Her grandmother hesitates. The weather isn't great. Erica's clearly emotional, but eventually she says yes. Erica puts on her bright pink rain jacket over a pink Winnie the Pooh sweatshirt, pulls on her blue jeans and white tennis shoes, clips the leash onto the dog and walks out the door. She doesn't come back. At 4:06 p.m., a couple walking their own dog through Indian Riffle Park notices Erica. She's sitting quietly on a bench near the pond, alone, small, a pink jacket bright against the gray afternoon. The dog is with her. That's the last confirmed sighting of Erica Baker alive. 24 minutes later, at 4:30, the Shih Tzu shows up near the recreation center. It's wandering aimlessly, dragging its leash behind it. There is no child attached to the other end. 24 minutes. That's all it took. A 9-year-old girl sitting on a park bench, and somewhere in the next 24 minutes, she simply ceases to exist. Her family searches the park, then the surrounding streets, then they call the police. Kettering PD launches a massive response. Officers canvass the neighborhood, volunteers comb the trails. They drain the pond in the park. They deploy ground-penetrating radar. They bring in dogs. Nothing, no clothing, no blood, no drag marks. Well, no witnesses beyond the couple who saw her on the bench. Erica Baker has vanished from a suburban park on a Sunday afternoon like smoke. And for 5 years, that's where it stays. A missing child poster, an open wound, a community that never stops looking and never finds a thing. December 10th, 2004. 5 years and 10 months after Erica disappeared. A 29-year-old convicted felon named Christian John Gabriel contacts the Kettering Police Department. He wants to talk. And what he tells them is this. On the afternoon of February 7th, 1999, Gabriel says he was driving a van near the intersection of Glengarry Drive and Powhatan Place, a residential street adjacent to the park. He was heavily impaired on narcotics. He heard a sickening thud. He saw a small dog run away, and when he stopped the van, he found the body of a little girl lying on the pavement, dead. Gabriel says he panicked. He had a criminal record. He was high. A vehicular homicide charge would put him away for decades, so he loaded Erica's body into the van and drove away. That's the confession. A hit and run, an accident followed by a cover-up. Gabriel goes to prison, but not for murder, not for manslaughter, for tampering with evidence and gross abuse of a corpse. He serves 6 years and walks out a free man in 2011. And here's the part that makes this case a special kind of hell. He never tells anyone where Erica is. Over multiple interrogations, Gabriel gives police locations. He sends them to Huffman Dam. He sends them to Cedar Creek State Park. He sends them to Eastwood Lake. Authorities deploy ground-penetrating radar at every site. They dig thousands of holes. They bring in cadaver dogs. They excavate entire sections of parkland. They find nothing, not a bone, not a thread, not a tooth. And Gabriel's story keeps changing. In the first version, he's the driver and his girlfriend, Jan Marie Franks, is in the passenger seat. In the second version, Franks is driving and he's the passenger. In the third version, 2 additional people are in the van, a man named Clifford Butts and Butts' girlfriend. And suddenly, Gabriel can't remember who drove, who buried the body, or where they put her. Every time detectives push harder, the story shifts. New characters appear, locations change, details evaporate. Gabriel isn't cooperating. He's running a shell game. And then the one person who might have been able to cut through the lies disappears permanently. Jan Marie Franks, Gabriel's girlfriend, the woman he placed in the van in every version of his story, died of a drug overdose in December 2001. 3 years before Gabriel ever confessed. Whatever she knew about that afternoon, whatever she might have told police about where they took Erica, it died with her. But maybe it didn't entirely. Detectives suspected that before she died, Franks had confessed the location of Erica's body to her criminal defense attorney, Beth Lewis. Attorney-client privilege, the most sacred wall in the American legal system. Lewis would have been ethically bound to keep that information confidential while her client was alive. But Franks was dead, and a 9-year-old girl was still missing. The state of Ohio went to extraordinary lengths. They obtained a waiver of confidentiality signed by Franks's surviving husband, authorizing the release of privileged communications. They subpoenaed Lewis to testify. They demanded she tell them what Franks had said. Beth Lewis refused. She refused the subpoena. She refused the waiver. She refused a direct court order. A judge held her in contempt of court and sent her to jail, and still she refused. Lewis eventually provided sealed testimony before a secret grand jury in 2006, but the contents of that testimony remain classified. Whatever Beth Lewis knows about where Erica Baker is buried has never been made public. Think about that. Somewhere in the American legal system, locked inside a sealed grand jury transcript, there may be specific geographic coordinates for a 9-year-old girl's grave, and nobody can touch it. So we have a confession, a convicted perpetrator, and a river theory. Let's pull it all apart. In at least one version of his story, Gabriel claimed Erica's body was disposed of in water, the Great Miami River System, or one of the surrounding reservoirs. Authorities dredged, they dragged, they searched shorelines, and they found absolutely nothing. If a 65-pound child was placed in the Great Miami River in February 1999, the water was cold and slow enough that remains, clothing, or skeletal material would almost certainly have snagged on debris, settled in an eddy, or washed to an accessible bank. Rivers don't dissolve people, they move them downstream. They don't erase every molecule. Then there is shifting story. Gabriel's confession changed core details every time he told it. The driver changed, the passengers changed. The burial site changed. That's not the behavior of a man struggling to remember a traumatic event. That's the behavior of a man carefully controlling what information he releases and what he holds back. He gave police enough to earn a lighter charge, abuse of a corpse instead of murder, while keeping the one piece of information that mattered locked behind his teeth. And that raises the question nobody wants to ask out loud. What if it wasn't an accident? Law enforcement has publicly stated a quiet, devastating theory. They believe that if Erica's remains are ever recovered, forensic analysis might reveal something that Gabriel desperately doesn't want discovered, that the injuries don't match a vehicular impact, that maybe the initial strike didn't kill her, that maybe Erica Baker survived the hit, hurt, conscious, terrified. And Gabriel made a choice that turns a panicked cover-up of an accident into a deliberate murder of a child to eliminate a witness. If that's true, if Erica was alive when she went into that van, then everything about Gabriel's confession is a calculated lie designed to minimize his sentence. The accident story gets him 6 years for abuse of a corpse. The truth would get him life, and the only way to prove it is to find her, which is exactly why he'll never tell anyone where she is. As of 2025, volunteer search teams are still looking. Texas EquiSearch Midwest has deployed cadaver dogs across 41 acres of dense brush surrounding Huffman Dam, following tips that have lingered for years. They haven't found her. Christian Gabriel served his 6 years and walked free. He is alive. He knows where Erica is. And there is no legal mechanism left to compel him to speak. Jan Marie Franks is dead. Clifford Butts has never been charged. Beth Lewis's testimony is sealed. And somewhere in Ohio, in a shallow grave under a parking lot, at the bottom of a reservoir, in a place that only one living person can identify, there is a 9-year-old girl in a pink Winnie the Pooh sweatshirt who has been waiting to come home for 26 years. This is the cruelest kind of disappearance. It's not a mystery. We know who did it. We know roughly what happened. We know the man responsible is breathing free air right now. and we know that the location of a child's body is locked inside the head of a person who will never, ever give it up, because doing so would prove he's a murderer. Not Erica Baker walked out her front door on a chilly Sunday afternoon to take her dog around the block. She was upset about a dance. She was wearing a bright pink jacket. She sat down on a park bench, and 24 minutes later, her dog came home without her. She was 9 years old, and she's still out there. Picture this. It's a Saturday night in September 1987, Bradford, Pennsylvania. A small, rusted-out industrial town tucked into the Allegheny foothills, the kind of place where everybody knows your truck by the sound of the engine. The air outside is cool, maybe low 50s, that first real bite of autumn where you can smell the leaves starting to turn. The streets are dead. The bars closed hours ago. And sitting at the edge of town, like some enormous metal cathedral, is the Corning Glass Works plant, 112,000 square feet of factory floor. During the week, this place roars. Hundreds of workers, furnaces at full blast, forklifts whining across concrete. But tonight, it's a graveyard. The weekend shutdown has emptied the building out, lights off in most sections. The only sounds are your own footsteps echoing off sheet metal and the low, constant drone of the tank, a massive glass furnace on the second floor that never gets turned off, radiating heat like an industrial sun in the dead of night. This is where Dale Kerstetter comes to work. Dale is 50 years old, 5'4", 130 pounds, receding gray hair, a pack-a-day habit, and 27 years of loyalty to this plant. He's an Air Force vet. He's got 6 daughters, a son, and 2 grandkids he adores. Everyone who knows him outside of management describes the same guy. Honest, steady, the kind of man who just shows up and does his job without complaint. But lately, things have been rough. Corning had been cutting back, and Dale got the short end of the stick. They demoted him from a skilled trades position down to night security, a move that slashed his annual pay by $5,000 to $7,000. That's real money in 1987 rural Pennsylvania. He's carrying somewhere between 30 and 40 grand in debt across truck and trailer payments. Management will later use this detail like a weapon, calling him a marginal employee. His family, on the other hand, will say the debt was completely manageable, that he had company investments, and that the idea of Dale abandoning his children is laughable. Remember that tension. It matters. So on Saturday night, September 12th, Dale pulls his pickup truck into the plant's parking lot, clocks in at 10:30 p.m., and at 11 p.m. sharp, he relieves the outgoing guard, Art Peterson. And Dale is now the only living soul in a 112,000 square foot industrial complex. His shift runs until 7 in the morning. It's supposed to be completely uneventful. It is anything but. 10 minutes, that's all it takes. At 11:10 p.m., just 10 minutes into Dale's shift, the plant's internal security cameras pick up something that shouldn't be there. A figure moving through the corridors with clear, deliberate purpose, and this figure is wearing a mask. Now, this is where it gets strange. Because what happens next on that grainy security footage isn't a confrontation. There's no struggle, no fight, no visible panic. The cameras capture Dale and this masked intruder meeting in a hallway. They appear to have a brief conversation, and then Dale simply walks alongside the man, calmly, toward the back of the plant. And during this walk, Dale does something that will be debated for the next 4 decades. He looks directly into the security camera. Was that a signal? A cry for help from a hostage who couldn't scream? Or was it arrogance? A man flaunting the fact that he's pulling off the heist of a lifetime? Hold that thought. By 11:45 p.m., Dale is recorded on camera for the last time. The masked man then proceeds to the second floor, directly to the restricted area around the tank, the massive furnace where Corning used precious metals in the glassmaking process. Between midnight and 1 a.m., cameras capture the intruder hauling a large, heavily loaded bag out of the facility on a wheeled cart. And then, nothing. Dale is required to make hourly check-in calls to Corning's headquarters in New York. He misses every single one from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. 6 consecutive missed calls. But here's the thing. The employee manning the desk in Corning that night was brand new. They apparently didn't realize the check-ins were mandatory. Nobody raised an alarm. Nobody called the plant. Nobody called the cops. For 6 hours, the silence just sat there. At 7 a.m., the morning relief guard, John Lindquist, walks in. The plant is empty. Dale's nowhere, but his lunch is sitting on the cafeteria table, uneaten. A newspaper is laid out beside it, his keys are sitting right there, and his pickup truck, still parked outside, unlocked. Inside the cab, investigators find Dale's holster, empty. His .22 caliber pistol's gone, but sitting right there on the seat is his day pack and a completely full, unopened carton of cigarettes. Think about that for a second. Dale Kerstetter was a heavy, committed smoker. If he was about to start a brand new life on the run, he walked away from a full carton of smokes. A man with a pack-a-day addiction doesn't do that. You grab the cigarettes. It's almost involuntary. It gets worse. By 5 p.m. that evening, plant officials finally conduct an inventory and realize that approximately $250,000 worth of platinum pipe has been stripped from the furnace area. $250,000 in 1987 money. That's well over $500,000 today. A formal investigation is launched, and when the Cattaraugus County Sheriff's Department brings in the K-9 unit, the dogs do something no one expects. They don't track Dale's scent out the doors toward a getaway car. They don't follow it to the parking lot. They follow it upstairs, directly to the second floor, directly to the tank. The massive furnace, the exact spot where the platinum was stolen. That furnace operates at roughly 2,500 degrees, hot enough to melt glass, hot enough to incinerate bone. So now we have two competing stories, and I want you to really sit with the contradictions in each one, because neither of them holds together cleanly. First theory is Dale was the mastermind. Plant management loved this version. Their narrative was simple. Dale was drowning in debt, humiliated by his demotion, and bitter enough to sell out the company. He conspired with the masked intruder, maybe an old buddy, maybe a fence he'd connected with, used his 27 years of intimate knowledge of the building to guide the thief past every alarm and camera blind spot, helped load up $250,000 in platinum, and then disappeared into the night to start a new life. Sounds tidy, right? But let's pull the thread. If Dale planned this, if this was his big escape, why did he leave his truck in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition? You don't flee the state on foot. You need a vehicle. You need your wallet. You need identification, and you definitely grab your cigarettes. More importantly, let's talk about the platinum itself. We're not talking about gold bars or a duffel bag of cash. This is industrial-grade platinum pipe. Where exactly does a 50-year-old night watchman in rural Pennsylvania fence $250,000 in stolen precious metal? Who's his buyer? How does he transport it? The metal was heavy. Yes, investigators noted one person could physically move it, but the logistics of converting that into untraceable cash and building a new identity in 1987, before the internet, before easy access to forged documents, that's not a security guard's skill set. That's an organized crime operation. And then there's the camera stare. The plant's personnel manager, Patrick Foley, told investigators he believed Dale was arrogantly flaunting the crime, staring into the lens like a man who knew he'd gotten away with it. But watch that footage with different eyes. Look at the positioning. The masked intruder is directly behind Dale. Forensic video analysts and Dale's family argue that the man is holding something to Dale's back, and that the stare wasn't defiance. It was desperation. It was a hostage looking into the only eye that might see him, with silently screaming for help. So how does the other side hold up? Second theory is Dale was the victim. Under this reading, the masked intruder wasn't Dale's partner. He was his killer. The thief was a current or former Corning employee, someone who knew the layout of this enormous plant floor by heart, who knew exactly where the platinum was stored, who knew the camera angles and the alarm systems. Dale, 10 minutes into his shift, simply had the catastrophic bad luck of being in the wrong corridor when the robbery kicked off. The intruder takes Dale hostage, forces him to provide access, uses him as a human keycard through the restricted zones. The calm demeanor on camera? That's a man with a gun pressed into his spine, trying not to get shot. The camera stare? a final, silent plea. And when the job was done, the thief had a problem. A living witness. A man who'd seen his build, heard his voice, maybe even recognized him. So what did that bag on the wheeled cart actually contain? Investigators have never been able to answer that question definitively. It could have held $250,000 in platinum pipe. It could have held Dale Kerstetter's body. It could have held both. And then there are the dogs. The scent trail leading straight to the 2,500-degree furnace. If someone wanted to destroy a body so completely that not a single fragment of bone or tooth could ever be recovered, that furnace would do it. No DNA, no dental records, nothing left but the ghost of a man who clocked in for a Sunday night shift and never clocked out. But here's what nags at you if you lean hard into this theory. The footage doesn't show a terrified hostage. It shows a man walking, calmly, without visible restraint. No stumbling, no hesitation. Is that the body language of someone being marched to their execution, or is that a partner doing a job? The honest answer? We don't know. And that's what makes this case so maddening. Nearly 4 decades later, Bradford is still divided. Some folks in town will tell you Dale was a crook who finally snapped, that the demotion and the debt pushed him over the edge, and he engineered the heist to bankroll a disappearance. They'll point to the calm footage, the lack of a struggle, and the fact that his body has never been found as evidence that he's out there somewhere, living under a different name with a dead man's social security number. His family will tell you that's insane, that Dale Kerstetter loved his children more than anything on this earth, that he would never, under any circumstances, voluntarily walk away from his grandkids, that the cigarettes, the keys, the uneaten lunch, all of it points to a man who expected to finish his shift and go home. A man whose night was violently interrupted. The platinum was never recovered. The masked intruder was never identified. Dale's .22 caliber pistol was never found. And despite decades of investigation, despite a local police department and the FBI taking runs at the case, not a single person has ever been charged. No body, no arrest, no answers. Dale Kerstetter drove to work on a cool September evening in 1987. He parked his truck. He set his lunch on the table. He walked into that enormous, echoing, empty factory to do the same job he'd done 1,000 times before. And somewhere between the cafeteria and that furnace on the second floor, he simply ceased to exist.